Hello everyone, and welcome to another new video. As many of you know, Coaster Locomotive 2105 was successfully moved to the Southern California Railway Museum in Perris, California on May 3rd, 2025. It has been a multi-year project to save the locomotive for preservation and then move it to the museum. The 2105 was hauled by BNSF Railway along with Santa Fe Bicentennial locomotive number 5704 from BNSF's diesel locomotive servicing facility in Commerce to Perris. The special train traveled by way of BNSF's main east-west rail line in the LA Basin known as the San Bernardino Subdivision, passing through Norwalk, Fullerton, Corona, and Riverside. At Riverside, the train left BNSF tracks for a journey down Metrolink's Perris Valley line for the rest of the trek to the museum. Dozens of spectators turned out trackside to watch the special. I'm planning on making a more in-depth video about saving Coaster 2105 later this year, but for this video I'd like to show everyone the journey to bring the locomotives on their homecoming trip to the museum. We begin early on the morning of May 3rd, 2025 in Commerce, California. This is BNSF's main diesel servicing facility in the Los Angeles Basin. Both locomotives, 2105 and 5704, were stored under cover at this facility for 2 years, waiting for the museum's trackage in Perris to be connected with the National Rail Network. This is a project that I will discuss in greater detail in the video about Coaster 2105 later this year. But, to summarize as briefly as possible, Metrolink upgraded what was a former BNSF Railway branch line between Riverside and Perris in the mid-2010s for a new commuter rail route dubbed the Perris Valley Line. As part of this upgrade work, the museum lost its rail connection with the outside world and then was faced with the challenge of both fundraising to pay for a new connection and working with various government agencies and contractors to build a new track connection. The museum finally received a several million-dollar grant through the city of Perris in 2024 to build the new track. While final plans for the permanent connection were still ongoing, the museum made separate efforts to establish a temporary connection to Metrolink tracks to bring their 2 new locomotives home. In March of 2025, temporary sections of track were placed up to the switch in downtown Perris, and plans began to take shape. With the final okay from BNSF Railway and then Metrolink, the move was confirmed a go in late April. Returning to May 3rd, the skies began to lighten as final preparations were made for the locomotives to leave Commerce. A BNSF crew, who also happened to be museum volunteers, brought a set of 3 GP60M locomotives west across the San Bernardino subdivision to pick up the Santa Fe 5704 and Coaster 2105. Before the train could depart, the locomotives needed to be turned and rearranged. 5704 would be right behind the 3 GP60s, with 2105 bringing up the end of the short train. Just before 7:20 a.m., the train finally departed Commerce bound for the museum. I waited for the train to pass at my first location, known as DT Junction. Before the special came through, Amtrak Pacific Surfliner Train 564 zoomed by, bound for its first station stop in Fullerton. A large crowd of fans greeted the train as it passed through Fullerton at 7:50 a.m. With a high-priority stack train right on their heels, the special flew along the San Bernardino subdivision all the way to Riverside. The train came to a stop in Riverside just before 9 a.m. to allow several trains to pass before proceeding onto the Metrolink Perris Valley subdivision. I used this opportunity to pick out another spot in Box Springs Canyon, quite arguably the most scenic portion of the trip. Meanwhile, crews down in Perris were working quickly to connect the temporary track connection to live rail. For about an hour, the train waited in Riverside. During that time, dozens of enthusiasts showed up to pick out a spot on the hillside to capture the train. At 10:20 a.m., a loud rumble could be heard as the train began to climb the grade through the canyon. A mile up the line, at a location known as Alessandro, the train came to a stop. The 3 BNSF diesels ran around to the other end of the train so that the 2 locomotives could be shoved the rest of the way to the museum. After a brief pause to switch the locomotives around, the train continued its southward journey to the museum. From the Alessandro Boulevard overpass, it was quite apparent why the locomotives were switched around earlier in the day in Commerce. The 5704 made quite the impression in its gleaming fresh paint job as it appeared to lead the train for this final leg of the journey into Perris. The train came to another stop just before entering the city of Perris to get permission from the crew working on the temporary track connection to enter the work zone. After a little more waiting, the train began to move again shortly after 12 p.m. Down at the 7th Street crossing in Perris, everyone waited patiently for the locomotives to arrive. The museum had brought up a long train to bring the locomotives the last mile to their new home. 5704 was slowly inched onto the temporary connector track, followed by 2105.
Got a little bit of
With the two locomotives just clear of the switch, the BNSF diesels uncoupled and returned north to March Field, where they would be parked following a full morning of work. The museum's train slowly inched up and coupled to the new locomotives. With airlines connected and everything good to go, Southern Pacific 3100 throttled up and proceeded south. I got one final look at the train from South B Street as it rolled along on approach to the museum. Once at the museum, 3100 dropped off 5704 and 2105 at the north end of the property and proceeded to the yard. Southern Pacific 1474, an Alco S4, coupled up to the two locomotives and pushed them the final feet south to the Pinacati Station platform for display. With the journey finally completed, the two new locomotives were spaced out along the platform as dozens of fans came to photograph and look at the two new arrivals. Later in the day, the 5704 and 2105 were turned and moved back to Car House 7 following a successful journey to their new forever home. Thanks for joining me for this special video following Coaster 2105 and ATSF 5704 on their trip to the Southern California Railway Museum. A huge thank you to everyone from the museum, BNSF Railway, and Metrolink for making this longtime dream a reality. If you'd like to help the museum by contributing to the restoration funds for these locomotives, checks or online contributions can be made out to the museum directly. Be sure to include the specific project fund on the memo line. Both of those are included on screen and in the video description. In addition to financial resources, the museum is always in need of volunteers to operate and restore trains and more. If you would like to volunteer at the SoCal Railway Museum, check the museum's website at socalrailway.org for additional information. As always, a special thanks to all my supporters on Patreon. To receive notifications whenever I post to YouTube, click on the subscribe button and select the Receive All Notifications option. Also, be sure to check out my other social media pages for even more great train and railroad themed content. I'll be back next Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time for a brand new railroading adventure right here on the YouTube channel. That's it for now. Until next time, I'm Mike Armstrong. I'll see you down the line. Thanks for watching.